kind teen helps an old lady carry groceries, shocked to learn she's the mother of a billionaire. Before we begin this incredible story, take a moment to tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel. The light above the counter at the Sunrise Diner flickered, a weak, dying heartbeat against the oppressive gray of the afternoon. Outside, a premature blizzard was burying the small town of Havenwood in a shroud of white, each gust of wind a mournful sigh that rattled the diner's old window panes. Leo watched a single, defiant snowflake melt against the glass, a fleeting moment of beauty before it vanished into nothing. He felt much the same. At 18, the weight of the world had settled onto his shoulders, heavy and cold as the snow piling up on the streets. He was the sole guardian of his 12-year-old sister, Maya, and the proprietor of this failing diner, the only legacy his parents had left them besides a mountain of debt. He ran a hand through his tired hair, his gaze falling on the stack of envelopes on the counter. Each one was a different shade of angry red, stamped with words like final notice and past due. They were paper tombstones marking the slow death of his family's dream. Upstairs, Maya was bundled under 3 blankets, her cough a faint, rhythmic punctuation to the diner's silence. The doctor said it was just a bad cold, but Leo knew better. It was the kind of cold that seeped in from unpaid heating bills, from a diet too reliant on canned soup, from the pervasive chill of hopelessness. Through the window, past the swirling snow, he saw the town's sparse foot traffic hurry by, heads bowed against the wind. No one spared a glance for his diner. No one ever did anymore. Then he saw her, an old woman, bent and frail, struggling against the wind with a single, overstuffed paper grocery bag. Her coat was thin, her scarf a pathetic wisp of color against the monochrome landscape. As a particularly vicious gust tore down the street, she stumbled. The bag slipped from her grasp, hitting the icy sidewalk with a dull thud. It split open, sending an apple, a can of beans, and a small carton of milk rolling into the slushy gutter. Leo watched, his heart aching with a familiar pang of shared struggle. Other people on the sidewalk simply angled their shoulders and pushed past her, their faces hidden, their compassion frozen solid by the cold. They saw an inconvenience, a delay. Leo saw a reflection of his own quiet desperation. Every instinct screamed at him to stay inside, to conserve what little warmth and energy he had left. Helping her wouldn't pay the bills. It wouldn't make Maya's cough disappear. It wouldn't stop the inevitable foreclosure. But then he saw the woman's shoulders slump in defeat, a small, silent surrender to the cruelty of the day. He thought of his mother, who used to say that the only thing you truly own is the kindness you give away. The thought was a spark in the cold emptiness of his chest. With a sigh that turned to white vapor in the frigid air, he grabbed his worn-out jacket from the hook by the door and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath and biting at his exposed skin. His jacket was no match for the brutal cold. He reached the old woman, who was now fumbling in the dirty snow with gloved fingers that looked too stiff to bend. "Ma'am," Leo said, his voice loud to be heard over the wind. "Let me help you with that." She looked up, startled. Her face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but her eyes were a startlingly clear blue, filled with a weariness that Leo recognized in the mirror every morning. She gave him a small, hesitant nod. "Thank you, young man. I'm not as steady as I used to be." "No trouble at all," he lied, his own hands already beginning to ache from the cold. He knelt, his knees cracking in protest, and began gathering the scattered groceries. The apple was bruised, the can dented. He carefully wiped the slush from the milk carton with the sleeve of his jacket. He found another bag inside the torn one and repacked everything, his fingers growing numb and clumsy. When he was done, he stood and offered her the salvaged goods. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "I can carry this for you." She pointed a trembling finger toward a dilapidated building down the street, where a series of small, grim apartments sat above a closed-down hardware store. "Just there. Room for inch." He nodded, taking the bag from her. It was heavier than it looked. As they walked, the old woman leaning on his arm for support. He could feel the stares of the few people left on the street. They weren't looks of admiration, but of curiosity, even suspicion. In Havenwood, an act of unprompted kindness was a strange and notable event. The stairs to her apartment were steep and poorly lit. Leo held the railing with one hand and the bag with the other, guiding her carefully up each step. Her room was small and sparse, containing little more than a single bed, a small table, and a hot plate. The air was cold, the only heat coming from a tiny, glowing space heater in the corner. It was a room that spoke of loneliness and poverty. "Please," she said, her voice raspy, "let me make you a cup of tea. It's all I have to offer." Leo knew he should refuse. He had to get back to the diner, to Maya. But he saw the earnest plea in her eyes, the deep-seated need to repay his small kindness with one of her own. To refuse would be to wound her pride. "I'd like that very much," he said, forcing a smile. He sat at the small table while she busied herself with the hot plate and two mismatched mugs. "My name is Ilara," she said, her back to him. "I'm Leo. I run the diner down the street." "The sunrise," she said, a hint of warmth in her voice. "I've noticed it. It looks like a place with happy memories." The words were a gentle stab to his heart. "It used to be," he admitted quietly. She brought the tea over. It was weak, but wonderfully hot. As he wrapped his numb fingers around the mug, he felt a measure of warmth return to him. Ilara sat opposite him, studying him with those intelligent blue eyes. She noticed the worn collar of his shirt, the faint tremor in his hands that wasn't just from the cold. "You have kind hands," she said, "but they carry a heavy burden." Before he could respond, she reached into the pocket of her coat and pulled out a small object. It was a bird, intricately carved from a single piece of dark wood, its wings outstretched as if in mid-flight. "I want you to have this," she said, pressing it into his palm. "My father carved it for me when I was a girl. He said it was a reminder that even when you feel caged, your spirit can still fly." Felt like an ancient, precious thing. "I can't take this," Leo protested. "You must," she insisted. "A gift for a gift. It's for luck." He closed his hand around the smooth wood, the gesture feeling strangely significant. He thanked her, finished his tea, and made his excuses to leave. As he walked back to the diner, the small wooden bird felt warm in his pocket, a tiny ember against the encroaching despair. The warmth vanished the moment he stepped back inside. A man in a tailored overcoat stood by the counter, tapping an expensive leather-gloved finger on its surface. Mr. Silas, the man who held the deed to the diner, and by extension the deed to Leo's life. Playing the hero out in the snow, Leo? Silas's voice was smooth and oily, a perfect match for his slicked-back hair. "You should be more concerned with the storm brewing in here." He gestured to the pile of red envelopes. "I've been more than patient. Your parents, bless their naive hearts, ran this place into the ground with their charity and their soft touches. I see you've inherited their poor business sense." "I'm working on it," Leo said, his voice tight. "Business has been slow because of the weather." Silas let out a short, cruel laugh. "The weather isn't your problem, son. You are. This town doesn't have room for sentimentality. It has room for profit." He slid a new envelope across the counter. This one a stark, clinical white. "That's the final foreclosure notice. You have until Friday, 5 o'clock. The full amount or the locks get changed. No more extensions. No more chances." Leo's blood ran cold. The amount was impossible, a figure so large it seemed like a joke. He could work for 100 years and never see that much money. He looked at Silas, at the smug satisfaction in the man's eyes, and felt a wave of utter helplessness wash over him. The diner wasn't just a building. It was the last piece of his parents he had left. It was Maya's home. "Please, Mr. Silas," he whispered, the words tasting like ash. "Just a little more time." "Time ran out a long time ago, Leo," Silas said, turning to leave. "Friday, 5 o'clock." He paused at the door, turning back. "And for what it's worth, No one will blame you. Everyone in this town knows you were destined to fail. The door closed, leaving Leo alone with the flickering light and the crushing silence. He sank onto a stool, his head in his hands. The little wooden bird in his pocket suddenly felt very cold and very small. The next few days were a blur of quiet panic. Leo cooked and cleaned and served the few customers who trickled in, a hollow smile plastered on his face. Every tick of the clock was a countdown to his ruin. In the evenings, he would sit with Maya, reading to her until she fell asleep, trying to shield her from the fear that was eating him alive. On Thursday evening, the bell above the diner door jingled. It was Alara. She moved slowly to a booth and sat down, her eyes finding his with a knowing sadness. "Just a cup of tea, please, Leo," she said softly. He brought it to her, his movements heavy. He couldn't hide the despair on his face. She watched him for a long moment before gesturing to the official-looking paper he'd tried to tuck under the cash register. Silas's notice. "Trouble?" she asked, though it wasn't a question. Something inside him broke. The dam of his composure, so carefully maintained for Maya's sake, finally crumbled. He sat down opposite her and the whole story poured out of him. The debt, his parents' dream, his fear for his sister, the impossible deadline. He told her everything, his voice thick with unshed tears. He wasn't talking to a stranger. He was confessing his failure to the universe. Alara listened without interruption, her gaze never wavering. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed her frail, wrinkled hand over his. Her touch was surprisingly firm. "My son," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I raised him by myself. We had nothing, less than nothing. I scrubbed floors so he could have books. I taught him that a man's character is not measured by the money in his pocket, but by the integrity in his heart. I taught him that kindness is an investment, and it always pays dividends." She squeezed his hand gently. He never forgot that lesson. Her words were a strange comfort, but they felt like a fairy tale from another world. This was Havenwood. This was reality. Here, kindness got you a foreclosure notice. Friday arrived like a death sentence. The sky was a leaden gray, mirroring the weight in Leo's chest. He'd counted the money in the register. It was barely enough to buy groceries for the next week, let alone satisfy a 5-figure debt. At 4:55 p.m., the bell on the door jingled. Mr. Silas entered, flanked by 2 large men who looked like they enjoyed their work. "Time's up, Leo," Silas announced, his voice booming in the nearly empty diner. The few remaining customers looked down at their plates, embarrassed and unwilling to intervene. "I don't have it all," Leo said, his voice shaking but his gaze steady. "But I have this." He pushed the small stack of cash across the counter. Silas scoffed, not even glancing at the money. "That's an insult. This is over," he gestured to his men. "Start with the tables." As the men moved forward, Silas turned back to Leo with a look of feigned pity. "Look, I'll make you a deal. A final act of mercy. Sign this paper right now, voluntarily relinquishing ownership, and I'll forget about the remaining balance you owe me. You walk away with nothing, but you walk away free and clear." It was a cruel, public humiliation, a final twist of the knife. Leo looked at the sneer on Silas's face, at the averted eyes of his neighbors, and he felt the wooden bird in his pocket. He thought of his parents. He thought of Alara's words. His fear solidified into a cold, hard resolve. "No," he said, his voice ringing with a strength he didn't know he possessed. "I won't sign anything. You can take this diner, but you will not take my dignity." Silas's face contorted with rage. "Fine. Have it your way. You lose everything." He pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff to have you forcibly removed." But before he could dial, the quiet hum of the diner was drowned out by a new sound from outside, the purr of powerful, expensive engines. A procession of sleek black cars, their headlights cutting through the gloom, pulled up in front of the sunrise. They were utterly alien in the humble landscape of Havenwood. Doors opened in unison, and a group of men in sharp, dark suits emerged, moving with an air of quiet, implacable authority. The diner door opened, and a man stepped inside. He was tall, impeccably dressed, with an aura of power so intense it seemed to suck the air out of the room. He paid no attention to Silas or his thugs. His eyes scanned the room and settled on a small booth in the corner, where Alara was sitting, calmly sipping her tea. The man walked directly to her. He bent down, his expression softening from granite to gold. "Mother," he said, his voice a low, respectful murmur. "I came as soon as you called. I apologize for the delay. The weather was troublesome." The entire diner was frozen in stunned silence. Silas's jaw hung open. Alara smiled faintly at the man. "Julian, you're just in time." Julian Croft. The name rippled through the room in silent shock. The reclusive billionaire. The corporate titan known for his ruthless efficiency and legendary success. He straightened up and turned, his cool, analytical gaze finally falling upon Mr. Silas. "You are Mr. Silas?" Julian asked. His tone was deceptively mild. Silas, flustered, puffed out his chest. "I am, and this is a private business matter." "Not anymore," Julian said calmly. One of his associates stepped forward and handed Silas a tablet. "As of 1 hour ago, Croft Enterprises completed the acquisition of Havenwood Lending and Investment, your parent company. Which means," he added, a predatory gleam in his eye, "that I now own your company, and by extension, I own this mortgage." He turned his gaze to Leo, who was standing behind the counter, utterly bewildered. "Leo, my mother has told me a great deal about you." He gestured to the foreclosure notice. "This debt is forgiven. In its entirety." Leo could only stare, speechless. "Forgiven? But that's not why I'm here," Julian continued, his voice resonating with purpose. "My mother came to this town to see if the world still had any decency left in it. She found it here in this diner with you. My organization is launching a new national restaurant initiative, focusing on authentic, community-based eateries. We need a flagship, a model of what we stand for." He smiled, a rare and genuine expression. "We want that flagship to be the Sunrise Diner." He laid a thick portfolio on the counter. "This is a proposal. We will invest whatever it takes to renovate and restore this building. We will cover all operational costs. We will provide a trust fund for your sister's education and healthcare. In return, you and Maya will be the sole proprietors of this location. You will also receive a 10% share in the national enterprise. You will never have to worry about money again." The room was so quiet Leo could hear the snow melting outside. Mr. Silas was pale, his bravado utterly deflated. The townspeople who had been ignoring Leo's plight were now staring at him with awe and undisguised greed. Leo looked from Julian's expectant face to Alara's gentle smile. He felt the wooden bird in his pocket. It wasn't a token of luck. It was a test of character, one he had passed without even knowing he was being graded. Tears welled in his eyes, not of sorrow, but of overwhelming, shattering relief. "Yes," he finally managed to whisper. "Yes, thank you." The transformation of the Sunrise Diner became the legend of Havenwood. Julian Croft's construction crews descended on the town, not with arrogance, but with respect. They hired local workers, paying them triple the standard rate. The diner was painstakingly restored, its old soul preserved but polished to a brilliant shine. Mr. Silas, ruined and disgraced after a thorough audit by Croft's accountants revealed years of predatory practices, quietly sold his home and left town. The community, shamed by its own indifference and astounded by Leo's reward, underwent a quiet transformation of its own. People started holding doors for each other. They smiled at strangers. They checked in on their elderly neighbors. The kindness that Leo had shown Alara had become contagious. But for Leo, the greatest change wasn't the money or the fame. It was the family he had gained. Alara moved into a beautiful house just down the street, but she spent most of her days at the diner, teaching Maya old family recipes in the gleaming new kitchen. Julian, a man the world saw as a remote and untouchable genius, became a regular fixture. He'd sit in a booth with Leo for hours, not as a billionaire benefactor, but as a friend, a mentor, and older brother. He taught Leo about business, but more importantly, he listened. They were an unlikely quartet. The orphan, the little sister, the billionaire, and his mother, bound together by a simple act of kindness in a snowstorm. 1 year later, the grand reopening of the diner, now renamed Sunrise by Leo and Maya, was the biggest event in the town's history. The place was filled with light and warmth and the sound of joyous laughter. The single flickering bulb had been replaced by chandeliers that cast a steady, golden glow on everyone. Maya, her cheeks rosy and her cough long gone, darted between tables, a confident and happy young girl. Leo stood behind the counter, not with the weight of the world on his shoulders, but with the easy confidence of a man who knew his worth. He looked across the bustling room at his family, Maya, Elara, and Julian, all seated at the largest table, saving a seat for him. His gaze fell upon the cash register. Sitting in a place of honor, right next to a picture of his parents, was a small, dark wooden bird, its wings forever outstretched. It served as a constant reminder that the greatest fortunes are not measured in dollars, but in decency. It was proof that one small, selfless act, a single seed of compassion planted in the coldest, harshest winter of the soul, could blossom into a future brighter and warmer than he had ever dared to dream. What did you think of Leo's story? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational stories that prove kindness always wins.